John, a 46-year-old veteran, carried the weight of a lifetime of service and loss. Having left the army 2 years ago, he struggled with the void left by the end of his military career. The years of war had left invisible scars, and the emptiness he felt seemed insurmountable despite therapy and attempts to rebuild his life. Yet, the greatest loss he carried was the separation from Milo, his loyal German shepherd and K8 partner. Milo had saved John's life countless times in the field, but after suffering injuries, the dog was retired and taken away from him. Since that day, John had felt as though a part of his soul had been ripped away. One day, at the urging of his younger sister Mary, John visited the local animal shelter. Mary believed that reconnecting with a dog might help John heal. Reluctantly, he walked through the aisles of barking dogs, feeling detached and skeptical. Then, a shelter worker mentioned a German shepherd in the back, one who had a difficult past and struggled with trust. Intrigued, John followed her, and there in a cage, lying in the corner, was Milo. John froze. He would recognize Milo anywhere, even after all this time. "Milo," he whispered, his voice breaking, but the dog didn't react. No wagging tail, no spark of recognition. It was as if John was just another stranger. The heartbreak was almost unbearable, but John knew he couldn't walk away. "I'll take him home," he said with quiet determination, knowing it would be a long and emotional journey to rebuild their bond. Over the following weeks, John faced rejection and frustration, but he remained steadfast. Milo, once fearless and vibrant, was now guarded and distant. Slowly, through patience and love, small moments of connection began to emerge. Milo sniffing John's hand, lying near his bed, or fetching a ball after years of forgetting how to play. Bit by bit, Milo and John found their way back to each other, proving that love, loyalty, and perseverance could overcome even the deepest wounds. Together, they began a new chapter, healing side by side. John stood frozen in front of Milo's cage, his heart pounding as memories of their time together on the battlefield flooded back. Milo, the German shepherd who had once been his fearless partner, lay curled in the corner, a shadow of the dog he remembered. His fur, now dull and uneven, was marred by scars, and his once vibrant eyes were clouded with mistrust. The sight of Milo, so broken and distant, sent a pang of guilt and sorrow through John. "Milo," he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. But the dog didn't move, didn't even lift his head. John's chest tightened. This wasn't the reunion he had dreamed of. "He's been through a lot," the shelter worker said softly, pulling John from his thoughts. "He has trouble trusting people. We're not sure of everything he's been through. But he's scared, anxious. He's been here for weeks, and no one's shown interest in him." Her words stung like a dagger. John clenched his fists, swallowing the lump in his throat. He had failed Milo once by letting them take him away. He couldn't fail him again. The worker opened the cage cautiously. Milo's ears twitched, and he glanced at her briefly before retreating further into the corner. John knelt down slowly, his movements deliberate. "It's me, Milo," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's John." He extended his hand, hoping for a spark of recognition, but Milo only stared, his body rigid. John fought back tears. The bond they had once shared, forged through fire and survival, seemed irretrievably lost. "I'll take him to the yard," the worker offered gently. Outside, Milo stayed distant, his movements wary, his gaze avoiding John's. As the sun set, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, John made a decision. "I'm taking him home," he said firmly, "no matter how long it takes. I'll bring him back. He was there for me when I needed him most. Now, it's my turn to be there for him." The drive home with Milo was laden with silence, broken only by the soft hum of the truck's engine. Milo lay in the back, his body stiff, eyes fixed on the passing landscape. John glanced in the rearview mirror, a storm of emotions swirling in his chest. The Milo he remembered would have eagerly leaned out of the window, soaking in every moment of freedom. Now, the dog seemed like a ghost, haunted and withdrawn. John tightened his grip on the steering wheel, determination hardening his resolve. Arriving at his small, weathered home on the outskirts of town, John opened the truck door. "Come on, buddy," he called gently, patting his leg. Milo hesitated, his paws pressing against the edge of the seat as if unsure whether to trust the man or the unfamiliar environment. After a few moments, Milo stepped out cautiously, his sharp gaze scanning every corner of the yard. It was as if he expected danger to lurk behind every tree. A painful reminder of what he had endured. Inside, John had prepared a cozy corner for Milo, a new bed, fresh water, and a few toys, but the dog stood frozen near the door. His muscles taut. The house, once a sanctuary for John, now felt heavy with tension. John knelt down, holding out a treat, his voice soft but steady. "This is your home now. You're safe here." Milo's ears twitched, but he didn't move, his mistrust palpable. Later that evening, as John prepared a simple dinner, he noticed Milo pacing near the windows, his tail low, his eyes darting nervously. A sudden noise outside, a branch snapping in the wind, sent the German shepherd into a low growl. Milo's reaction was swift and sharp, as though he were still bracing for combat. John set down the pan and crouched nearby, his voice steady. "It's okay, boy, it's just the wind," but his own hands trembled slightly, realizing just how deeply Milo's trauma ran. That night, John left his bedroom door open, a quiet invitation for Milo. Hours later, he woke to the sound of soft footsteps. Peering into the shadows, he saw Milo lying near the doorway, keeping a watchful eye on him. A flicker of hope stirred in John's chest. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was a start. In the days that followed, John's efforts to connect with Milo intensified, but the dog's guarded demeanor remained. Every interaction felt like walking a tightrope. Determined to break through the barriers, John decided to take Milo to the backyard for a simple exercise. Something to spark a memory of their bond. Armed with a familiar rubber ball from their past, John crouched down, holding it up for Milo to see. "Remember this, boy?" he asked, his voice tinged with hope. Milo stared at the ball, his ears twitching. For a moment, John thought he saw a flicker of recognition in the dog's eyes. He tossed the ball gently a few feet away, but Milo didn't move. Instead, he stood frozen, his body tense, as if weighing the risks of engaging. John felt his chest tighten, the silence between them heavy with unspoken pain. "It's okay, Milo," he murmured, backing away to give the dog space. Just as John was about to retrieve the ball himself, a sudden crack of thunder rolled through the sky, startling them both. Milo's reaction was immediate and visceral. He bolted toward the fence, his body trembling, ears pinned back, and eyes darting wildly. It was as if the sound had transported him back to the battlefield, to a time when danger lurked at every corner. John rushed to Milo's side, kneeling beside him. "It's just a storm," he said, his voice firm yet soothing. But Milo didn't calm down. His breathing was erratic, his tail tucked tightly against his body. Then, something unexpected happened. As John reached out a hand, Milo flinched but didn't retreat. Slowly, cautiously, the dog allowed John's hand to rest on his head. "You're safe now," John whispered, his own voice trembling with emotion. It was a fleeting moment of trust, fragile but profound. Later, as the storm raged on, Milo curled up near the corner of the room, his eyes still wary but less distant. John sat on the floor beside him, the rubber ball resting between them. It wasn't much, but it was a glimmer of progress, a sign that, even amidst the storm, there was hope for healing. One cold, misty morning, John woke up to find Milo sitting by the living room window, staring into the gray distance. The dog's tense posture and restless gaze signaled that something wasn't right. John approached carefully, holding a steaming cup of coffee. "What's out there, boy?" he asked softly. Milo's ears perked up briefly, then flattened as he turned his head away. The unease in the room was almost tangible, as if the air itself held a warning. Determined to distract Milo and reinforce their bond, John reached for a small wooden box in his closet. Inside was the old military whistle he had used to call Milo during their missions. He hesitated, the weight of the memories nearly overwhelming him, but he knew he had to try. Heading to the backyard, he gave 2 short blows on the whistle, the sharp sound cutting through the foggy air. Milo froze, his ears shot up, his body rigid as he locked eyes with John. For a moment, it seemed like Milo was transported back to their shared past. John's heart raced, a flicker of hope igniting as Milo took a cautious step forward. "That's it, boy," John whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. But just as the tension began to ease, a sudden noise shattered the moment, a loud metallic clang from the front of the house. Milo immediately whipped around, growling low and deep, his instincts as sharp as ever. John, alarmed, moved toward the source of the noise, with Milo shadowing him like a sentinel. They reached the front yard to find an overturned trash can and faint footprints in the damp ground. Leading toward the road, John scanned the horizon, his pulse pounding. Someone had been there, watching. As the sky darkened with the approaching storm, John knelt beside Milo, who remained alert, his growls steady. "Looks like we've got someone to watch out for," John muttered, gripping the whistle tightly. Milo leaned into him slightly, his stance protective. The bond between them, fragile but undeniable, had taken another step forward, this time forged in shared vigilance against an unseen threat. The day dawned quiet, with the sun casting a golden light across the yard. John sipped his coffee on the porch, watching Milo pace with less tension in his steps. The German shepherd seemed more at ease, his movements no longer weighed down by distrust. Determined to make the most of the moment, John decided to reintroduce Milo to a piece of their shared past. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a weathered military whistle. It was a symbol of the bond they once had, a sound that had meant trust and survival in their toughest times. John hesitated, his thumb brushing against the worn metal. Finally, he raised the whistle to his lips and gave two short, familiar blows. The sound echoed through the crisp morning air, clear and resonant. Milo froze, his ears perked up, and he whipped his head toward John, his body stiff with attention. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, Milo took a step forward, his eyes locked on John. "That's it, buddy," John murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You remember, don't you?" To John's amazement, Milo began to close the distance between them. The cautious, guarded demeanor that had defined him since their reunion seemed to dissolve. Finally standing in front of John, Milo leaned in and nudged his leg gently with his nose. John knelt down, his trembling hand reaching out to touch the dog's fur. "I missed you, boy," he whispered, his voice breaking. Milo didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into John, his eyes soft with something that felt like recognition. Tears streamed down John's face as he pressed his forehead against Milo's. "You saved me once, and you're saving me again," John said, his voice barely above a whisper. For the first time in years, John felt the weight of his guilt lift slightly. Milo wasn't just responding to the whistle, he was responding to the bond they had built. The trust they had forged in fire and pain. In that moment, man and dog found something they both desperately needed, each other. The park was quiet as the morning sun painted the grass in soft hues of gold. For John, this was more than a simple outing, it was a pivotal moment. A final test of how far he and Milo had come. As they arrived, Milo stood by John's side, his stance more confident than it had been in months. John carried the old rubber ball, his fingers brushing over its worn surface, a small yet powerful symbol of their shared past. Taking a deep breath, John gave Milo a reassuring pat. "All right, boy, let's see what you remember," he said, his voice trembling with both hope and fear. He gently tossed the ball a short distance, his heart pounding as Milo hesitated, his sharp eyes fixed on the object. For a moment, John thought the memories might be too buried, the trauma too deep, but then, slowly, Milo moved. He stepped forward, cautiously at first, sniffing the air as if testing its safety. And then, in an instant, he broke into a sprint, his movements fluid and purposeful. Milo scooped up the ball with his mouth and trotted back to John. Dropping it at his feet, John knelt down, his hands shaking as he cupped Milo's face. "You did it, Milo," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. Tears welled in his eyes as he looked into the dog's face, now filled with the spark of recognition and trust that had been absent for so long. As the day went on, they played together, laughter and barks filling the once silent park. Each toss of the ball, each joyful return, was a testament to the bond that had weathered time and pain. By the time the sun dipped lower in the sky, John sat on a bench, Milo resting his head on John's lap, eyes half closed in contentment. Looking out at the horizon, John whispered, "We made it, partner, we really made it." Stroking Milo's fur, He felt a profound sense of peace he hadn't known in years. It wasn't just about reclaiming what they'd lost, it was about forging something even stronger. Together, they had found their way back to hope. The evening sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm glow across the yard as John stood at the porch, looking out at Milo playing with his ball. It was a sight that filled him with emotions he couldn't quite put into words, a mix of relief, gratitude, and something deeper, redemption. He sipped his coffee, watching as Milo ran, his movements no longer cautious but free, as though the weight of his past had finally begun to lift. John reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. He had feared it would never happen, that the dog he once knew would be lost forever to trauma. But Milo's eyes now gleamed with a life and trust that hadn't been there when John first brought him home. The scars they both carried hadn't disappeared, but they had found a way to bear them, together. "All right, boy," John called softly, setting down his mug, "let's see how far we've come." He grabbed the old military whistle, its metal cool in his hand, and blew the familiar pattern, two short bursts that echoed through the air. Milo froze for a moment, his ears perking up. The tension was palpable as John held his breath. Would Milo respond? Or would the memory of that sound still hold him back? To John's astonishment, Milo turned and ran toward him, his tail wagging in a way John hadn't seen in years. Milo skidded to a halt at John's feet, looking up with an expression that spoke volumes. There was no fear, no hesitation, just loyalty and love. John knelt down, wrapping his arms around Milo in a rare show of vulnerability. "You came back to me, boy," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You never gave up on me. And I'll never give up on you." As they sat there, the light fading into twilight, John felt a peace he hadn't known in years. It wasn't just about reconnecting with Milo, it was about finding himself again. Through the dog who had always been his compass. Together, they had rediscovered hope, proving that love and patience could overcome even the deepest wounds.